Israel Update with Gadi and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Tablet's Israel Update. It's 213 days to the war. It's a Tuesday, 7th of May. I'm Gadi in Tel Aviv, and now we have an amazing joke for you about the Hudson offices being, Mike.
What? This is a joke?
It is a joke. And
I'm in
now
the
pretending
headquarters?
it's not, pretending it's not, just means that the joke is on me. Because I first said the headquarters, and you laughed at me. And ever since, rub it, and don't think שהפנקס פתוח והיד רושמת. The booklet is open and the hand is writing. As you misquoted Ben Gurion, it's actually...
I never checked. I said I was going to check it. It's Levi Eshkol? It's not Ben Gurion?
Levi Eshkol, yeah.
It's not Levi Eshkol quoting?
So, yeah. So it's 1-0 for me in the beginning of this podcast. All that.
Oh, wow.
Okay, it has been, as you said earlier, one of the most dramatic weeks since the war began. Shall we go over the main news items?
But I'm going to, instead of doing the headlines, I'm going to just tell you about two news items. And I'm going to tell you the story of the hostage negotiations as I have pieced it together, the best I can piece it together, because we're hearing so many headlines today. Hamas accepts a ceasefire. Israel is started the Rafah campaign. American and Israeli officials are falling out with each other. So, and I think it's better if I just tell the story as I understand it, and then we can discuss what's going on. Okay, so back on April 26th, that was, I think, the Friday before Passover for you, the Israelis softened their position. Remember, back in April, on April 4, Biden slammed Netanyahu and demanded that he send an empowered team to Cairo to negotiate. And from that point on, the Israeli position on the negotiations for a hostage for prisoners deal has been softening up. And then on the 26th of April, the Israelis offered, and we talked about it last week, what Secretary of State Blinken called a very generous offer to Hamas. So we waited and waited and waited for Hamas to respond, partly because Hamas, it's Sinwar who makes the decisions, and he's sitting in a tunnel in Rafah, presumably, and you can't get to him electronically, only by courier can you get to him, so it takes time. And he uses this to his advantage in the negotiations. So he didn't send a response until last Friday. And the Americans and the Qataris, the Egyptians, received the response. The Israelis chose not to send a team to Cairo to receive the response because they thought this wasn't a negotiation. They were just waiting to hear back what Sinwar was going to say. Anyway, Sinwar responded over the weekend to the Israeli offer, and it was something that the Americans thought was unacceptable. So then Hamas came back on Monday with a new response, and they announced on Monday that they had accepted the proposal that was offered to them. And the Israelis, the Israelis heard of this Hamas acceptance was over the airwaves from the news reports. Now it looks like, of course, it's absolutely certain that Hamas did not accept the proposal that the Israelis put on the table. They responded saying they accepted it, but accepted something else. So in other words, Hamas is still negotiating. Now, the interesting thing here, though, is what happened between the Americans and Hamas over the weekend. Because some Israelis are saying, and I think probably very credibly, that they believe the Americans negotiated with Hamas over Israel's head. Now, the deal that Hamas says it offered is that it will it will release 33 hostages, specifically women, older men, and the sick and wounded, and some of those are going to be corpses, not actually living people. In return for that, Israel will let hundreds of prisoners go from Israeli prisons, and there will be a 42-day, that's a 6-week ceasefire. Now, the issue over which the Americans and the Israelis are, where there's tension right now, is that the Israelis believe that the Americans gave guarantees or something close to guarantees that there will be an end to the war once this ceasefire begins. That the scenario that is envisioned by the deal is that there'll be this 42 days, and then during that 42 days, there will be another deal followed by another 42-day extension. And Hamas has been arguing all along that it needs a guarantee up front that this will bring an end to the war. The Israelis have refused in that regard. And now what the Israelis are saying is that the Americans are using language with Hamas over the heads of the Israelis, which is pretty much guaranteeing an end to the war. While this is going on, news has also broken that the United States has withheld arms shipments to the Israelis, specifically JDAMs. These are kits that turn dumb weapons into smart weapons. The press is saying that is partly or the press is putting it in the context of the Rafah campaign, and that this is meant to pressure the Israelis not to start the Rafah campaign. Personally, I think it's more than that. I think it also has to do with Hezbollah, but we can talk about that later. In the meantime, the Israelis have started what would be maybe the beginning of a Rafah campaign. They have taken the Philadelphia corridor from the Israeli border to the Rafah crossing, and they have started to evacuate people and carry out in the outskirts of Rafah.
Mike, I want to show the map of this, but since we're also audio, so you'll have to explain to our viewers, to our listeners, what they cannot see on the audio version. So if you're watching us on the video, this is the map. The red area is the corner of Gaza. It's the east,
the southeast corner.
Yeah. And the Philadelphia corridor is the border with Egypt. And according to this map, the Israeli forces are about between a third and half the way.
Right. So they haven't. So, and the city, what's called the Rafah crossing is actually on the outskirts of Rafah. So the Israelis have gone along the Philadelphia corridor to the Rafah crossing, but they haven't actually gone into Rafah itself. And there's one more point here, and then we can start discussing it, Gadi. And that point is that there are different interpretations of what Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing with this. Some people are saying this is the beginning of the Rafah campaign. Other people are saying, no, this is just part of the negotiation with Hamas, and that it's good, strategically valuable for Israel to take the Rafah crossing, but this is not necessarily the beginning of the Rafah campaign. I think what a lot of people are expecting, and I would put myself in that category, is that Hamas is going to come back with another response to the Israeli response to their position, and then we're going to have a deal. It looks to me like we're getting very close to a deal.
So here's what it looked like from the Israeli side, because nothing of what you said, or very little of what you said, reached a wide audience in Israel, because the press is obsessed with only one thing, and that's Ghalab, Rak lo Bibi. That's a rough translation of only not Bibi, and I would say the better translation would be Never-Bibi, like never,
or Bibi derangement syndrome.
Yeah, BDS. What was reported in the press here is that we almost reached a deal, and then outrageously Netanyahu decided to scrap it, and he did it anonymously by giving the press information which is not attributable. How would you say? He said Makor Medini Bachir, a senior political official. That's how his.
But I saw in the Israeli press that they attributed it directly to Netanyahu.
Yes, they did, because with Netanyahu they don't respect the basic rules of journalist ethics. It's just Netanyahu is beyond the pale for them, and this is what they. And so the Israeli public is, here was a deal to finally bring our brothers and sisters back, but Netanyahu, they told us, is only thinking of himself and his own political career. Somehow there are no legitimate interests of the state of Israel. Everything for the Never-Bibi crowd is, someone told me today, no, you have to believe them when they say they want Netanyahu to lose the war. They don't think it's their war. It's Netanyahu who's going to lose the war. That's the radical side. But
I have a friend who thinks the way you're talking.
Well,
and I have discussions with him. It keeps me honest when as somebody who's people call upon sometimes to say, what are Israelis thinking? I talk to you, but then I talk to others who don't think like you. And I can tell you, he's 100% sincere in all of these. I read Ben Caspit. I don't personally like Ben Caspit for all kinds of reasons, but because I found him unreliable over the years. But I read him in order to understand how people are putting this stuff together. And my friend would say that the Rafah the Rafah campaign is actually strategically insignificant.
Yeah, because this is the line in the press. Look, the press is meticulous and manipulative, and many of the people who do this do consciously manipulate. Many others just believe it. And if that guy is actually your friend, I'm guessing your assessment is good about his sincerity, but he got it from somewhere. And now then, look what really happened, and this is another journalist you actually do like. Amit Segal said on, I think it was yesterday night, or else the Motzei Shabbat, the end of the Sabbath, and he said, here's what really happened. Israel put a proposal on the table. The proposal was rejected by Hamas. The Americans said, look, we will commit in the name of the Israelis what they won't say, that we shall force them to end the war. Let's reach an agreement based on that, and then if they try to return to the war, we'll tell them, oh, but you can't, either by forcing them or by saying, wait, but you committed before, or we committed on your behalf. When Netanyahu understood they're tying a noose around his head, because what would have happened is, if the Hamas said yes, and Netanyahu would be committed to a deal that Israel didn't know commits it to end the war, which he absolutely rejects, and rightly so. If you think about Netanyahu's personal interests, if they can be separated in the head of a leader from the interest of the state, Netanyahu knows that if this war ends with defeat, he is gone in 5 minutes. So Netanyahu, but this is not a noose around his head. This is a noose around our head, around Israel's head. So when Netanyahu noticed this was happening, he, in the middle of the Shabbat, which is unusual, he put out 2 separate messages saying Israel would not agree to the end of the war, to make that clear to the Americans and Hamas. The press was wild and furious because the trick didn't work. But Netanyahu did the responsible thing, and he expected that people who have been at least formally supporting the end of the war, like Gallant, like Minister of Security, like Gadi and Benny Gantz, who joined the coalition with their centrist party, what's it called, National Unity Party. So they didn't act. They rode the spin in the press and said non-committal things. They should have supported Netanyahu completely, because anyone who sees reality knows that this was a trap that Israel would just walk into a trap. It would later find very hard to extract itself from. So Netanyahu had to make that clear. But then go back to the first part of my story and see how the press frames it. The press frames, there was a deal, Hamas agreed, and now after Hamas agreed, Netanyahu deliberately put an obstacle and made and scrapped the deal.
Yeah. Well, they say then the press also reports that when Hamas came back with a counter proposal, Hamas presented it publicly as we accepted the offer,
which was not the offer.
And then there's a ton of headlines. There's a ton of headlines, including one I saw on the BBC saying, Hamas accepts ceasefire, and then the next story is, and Israel goes to the Rafah crossing. So Hamas is ready for peace, but Israel is plowing ahead with its military action.
I think at this point we have no choice but to start laughing at the way the crude, ugly, disgusting way which these people are manipulating the real stories and the reality of this war, beginning with the portrayal of the Palestinians as the victims in this war.
Well, all of this is actually really effective. And let's for a second, let's just in addition to laughing at the press, but let's also have a little bit of respect for Yahya Sinwar. He's getting help. There's no doubt about it, including as I see it from the United States. But he's a very savvy guy. He's a very clever guy, and he's just a stone cold, steely-eyed killer.
Murderer.
But also very shrewd. So he understands the minute he says, "I accept," even if it's a lie, that puts tension between the Israelis and the Americans. There's a lot of tension now between them. It also puts tension between the Israelis and themselves, with each other, because you have all the.
Absolutely, the Hamas have been putting out propaganda that said Bibi doesn't care about the hostages. They know how to play us. And then these the crowd that supports the deal, that wants to go to the deal, that said that Bibi is heartless. There is hardly imaginable worse moral degradation, because they are putting pressure only on the Israeli government. That is, they are reducing the chances of returning the hostages while proclaiming their bleeding hearts. And some people believe that, because there is
a lot of people.
Maybe your friend, and I'll tell you how it's structured. It's always like this with the left in Israel. I've been saying this from long before the war. There are the manipulators and the useful idiots. The useful idiots think that going to demonstrations will return the hostages, and that Bibi is heartless, and Smotrich is evil, and Ben Gvir is a Kahanist racist. And therefore, they want our hostages. Some people actually say that. They want them to rot in the tunnels because they have no heart. And then there are the manipulators who care nothing about the hostages and who just coldly calculate that this is the way to topple Bibi. Let me remind you of how sophisticated some of these people are. On October 7th, on that dreadful Sabbath, in the afternoon, Ronen Tzur, a political strategist and a longtime anti-Bibi activist, arranged the committee of the family of the hostages. Now, I can't prove that this is what he was calculating, but if he was right on target to an extent. I think in the end, most Israelis will not believe all these spins.
We saw in that video we aired, I don't know, many weeks ago, maybe months, of Ehud Barak. He was laying it out, basically, to use the hostages. So, I mean, they calculated very early about how to do this.
Yeah, but Barak, in that video, I went back to that video because I also, in my mind, I anachronistically, I thought he zeroed in on the hostages. He actually talked about the fallen soldiers and the displaced communities, and in that he was wrong because now
Oh,
the
oh,
path.
that's funny. That's funny because I remember it. I guess
Of course,
I should check before I talk.
no, this is very easy to make this mistake. And why? Because we know what happened and we know what the gist of what Barak said, and then we retrospectively order the story into a comprehensible narrative.
Yeah.
But if you go back, he was not just wrong. He planned something very cynical. He just picked the wrong groups because the displaced Israelis and the parents of the fallen soldiers and the survivors of the attacked communities, these people are very dubious about the hostage deal because they're saying, wait, we sent our sons and daughters to die in Gaza in droves, and this is for nothing. Hamas will just stay there. Do the lives of the soldiers count any less than the lives of the hostages? And for a person who, and they demonstrated on the evening of Shabbat when it seemed like a deal was in the making, they protested the deal, which is why I would add a caveat to your calculation that Hamas is going to try and bring Israel. Hamas is going to going to be more moderate now in its demand in order to stop the Rafah invasion. And as you say, there would be some compromise in the middle. This is not something these families are going to accept. And so Netanyahu also knows, if you think of what is going on in Netanyahu's head now, which I can't guess, but the pressures are not just the pressures to undermine him. He's also up against the wall with his own supporters who have been, the minute the deal was more or less, when we thought the deal was going to come through, the right-wing feed was, how do you say when a cat becomes samur, when a cat becomes wound up?
He gets his back up.
When a cat, so the right-wing feed got its back up and started grumbling and saying, if we are going to end this war with Hamas on its feet in Gaza, then this government has no right to exist. And this is not, you heard it in the cabinet from Smotrich and Ben Gvir. Of course, the media tried to portray them as if this was some eccentric, weird position.
Yeah, it's a right-wing position rather than just the public's view.
But the public sentiment is there. So we are very sentimental about the hostages. It's very easy to manipulate that sentiment because when you think of what is the atrocities that these people are going underground in the tunnels, I don't want to describe to our listeners the gory detail of what can happen to them there. Many of them are probably sadly no longer alive. It's very easy to put forth these images, and that's a powerful motivating force. But then in the end, Israelis ask themselves, are we going to live next to the Nazis? And as I've been telling you, I think for months here, if we can't repopulate the Western Negev and the north of the country, then it doesn't matter what people write in agreements and what the IDF will do in the short run. In the long run, no government can survive if people vote, as you taught me to say, not with their legs, but with their feet, and don't go back home. If they don't go back home, eventually this pressure is going to rise. And lastly, Israelis are politically savvy. We lived in La La Land for a long time, thinking that the Middle East, at least for us, will be a European-style country. People have been rudely awakened by October 7, but I don't think they've internalized the depth of the change that we will need to make. So some people are in the army say are still thinking, how do I wiggle out of the ICC in The Hague so that in The Hague, sorry, that so that we can still go to our skiing vacations. But this is people are not realizing that we are at the beginning of a new era in which our economy would have to be geared for a long, long war of many rounds if we are to defeat Iran.
I just wrote an article that touches on a lot of those issues. We'll discuss it more when it actually comes out. But I just want to point out a connection between what you're saying right now and the news story about the United States withholding the weapons. Israel today, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but in 1957, Israel took the Sinai from Egypt, and Eisenhower put pressure on the Israelis to withdraw from the Sinai, and got basically no concessions, certainly not from the Egyptians, in return for their withdrawal. And it was one of the worst crises in U.S.-Israeli relations. Was Ben-Gurion was the prime minister, Eisenhower was the president, and the Israelis took the Sinai in late October, early November. In 8 days. They took Gaza and the Sinai in 8 days, right? Start with that. Then Eisenhower started putting pressure on them immediately for an immediate and unconditional withdrawal from Sinai and Gaza. Ben-Gurion dragged his feet, tried to negotiate, haggle, and finally, early February, Eisenhower lost all patience, went on national TV, said, the Jews are destroying the United Nations and peace and security in the world, and so on. And Ben-Gurion decided to withdraw, but he had an argument with Moshe Dayan, the chief of staff. And Moshe Dayan said, we have done a study in the IDF, and we have the food, fuel, and ammunition to hold out under these economic sanctions that the Americans are threatening, because that was the instrument that Eisenhower was pressuring the Israelis with. We can hold out for 6 months. So let's, instead of just dropping to our knees and complying with this pressure, let's hold out for a while, and maybe we can get a better deal. And Ben-Gurion said, no. I pushed Eisenhower to the brink as far as we can go. We're going to have another war with Egypt. It's coming. In that next round, we're going to need the United States. So I gotta, I don't want to make the guy any more angry. But this is operational sovereignty that Israel in the 1950s, this was a fledgling country. It had a tiny economy. The food was still rationed in the country. So, it was a very poor, small country, and it could hold out for 6 months against U.S. pressure. If the U.S. was to embargo Israel today, how long do you think they could last? The IDF does not enjoy operational sovereignty today. It is more dependent on the Americans today than it was in 1956. It's amazing, actually.
Yeah, it's terrible, and I hope that it will be fixed now. I just want to mention to our listeners and viewers that you wrote a book about this called Ike's Gamble, and that it has been translated to Hebrew. And also tell you something, if I may provoke you, Mike, that on the right-wing feed, it is customary to say that Ben-Gurion was weak and buckled immediately under Eisenhower's pressure. Do you estimate Ben-Gurion as weak?
No. Ben-Gurion is my two favorite non-Americans are
Churchill?
No, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk and Ben-Gurion. Seriously.
Yeah. Ben-Gurion studied law in Turkey.
And yes, he did. He was a good Ottomanist, Ben-Gurion. These are men with enormous strength, intelligence, strength, guts. And Ben-Gurion was an incredibly savvy guy, and he had, look, in that crisis, the Soviets threatened Israel with nuclear annihilation. So he had, at the same time that Eisenhower was putting pressure on him to withdraw, the Soviet Union was putting pressure on him to withdraw, and it was saber rattling with with nuclear tipped missiles. So believe me, Gadi, there are very few men in those circumstances whose knees would not begin to shake.
So let me tell you a story from another world entirely. about the ability to stand pressure coolly, because as you know, I wrote a novel about late night bars in Tel Aviv, so I know a lot about the bouncers. And when they explained to me what a tough bouncer is, they said it's
But
not
you
the
wrote a
muscle.
novel, but you're saying the novel was based on actual research.
It was, I knew these people. I
Okay, so you
hung
didn't just
around.
write a novel, you actually went out and talked to them. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I didn't do the research in the library, and so I learned a lot of street savvy things. And they kept telling me the bouncers are like the philosopher bouncers. There are people like that
Yeah.
who understand who
The philo
understand
the
how it really
philosopher
works.
bouncer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Mike. In every profession, no matter what, there are wise people who understand things that from the outside you don't know. And
Yeah.
this is a very tough job because the bouncers were employed in places where police patrols were rare. So basically, they were enforcing, if not the law, then some order that would not become just total mayhem. And so
Yeah.
they told me it's not just the muscle, it's the talk. And I try to understand what is the talk? How do you what kind of talk do you have to talk to make people afraid of you? And then they gave me an example for some guy who is now in jail. And he was standing at an entrance to a bar, and a criminal came, like a small guy, but very fierce. And he said, "No, it's a private party." It's not a private party. It's a bar. And and so the guy pulls a gun and put it in his on his forehead.
Mm.
Is it a private party? And then they told me, "What do you think that guy said?" That's the talk. That's the talk.
Mm.
And I said, "Well, I don't know." And here's what he said. He said, "You better pull the trigger, because if you take your hand down, I'll kill you." That's the talk. That's the talk. And I said, "So what happened?" He said, "Well, he took his hand down and they killed him." I said, killed him? He said, "No, but he spent 6 months in the hospital later for challenging a bouncer." And then I said, "It's a nice story, but what if he pulled the trigger?" And my friend, the bouncer, the philosopher bouncer, said, "No, he wouldn't have, because if he's like if he's a mobster with the weight that can just shoot people right and left, then he's not stupid, and he's not going to kill a bouncer and go to in front of 30 witnesses and go to jail for life. And if he's not such a tough guy, then he wouldn't shoot either. So either way, he won't shoot." And I said, "Well, what if he's crazy?" And he said, "Nah," he looked him in the eye, he saw he's not. So that's the gist of the story. In the end, Ben Gurion stands there and said, "Nah, they won't they won't use the bomb." And he's right, but you need a special kind of cool
Oh,
to have a
yeah,
gun pointed
actually,
at your head and then said, I don't think I don't think the guy has it. And then,
the Soviet threat with the nuclear weapons wasn't credible at all. But there's a certain kind of threat when it comes to you from you. It's still a threat from a very powerful party. And by the way, I was once in London. I was a deputy assistant secretary of defense, and I was in London meeting with these Brits, and they took us out for very late night drinking, and we had a lot to drink. Nobody drinks like the Brits. Man, I don't know. Maybe the Russians and
Russians
Ukrainians.
do.
Yeah, but very few people drink like the Brits anyway. So we were me and this other guy who was a special forces guy we'd had a few, and we were staggering back to our hotel at about 2 in the morning, and in Soho in London, and these dirt bags came out of nowhere and were giving us some trouble. And I'm in my suit, and well, what sort of in my suit, and I'm thinking I'm a DASD, what's going to happen here, and what trouble I'm thinking about the trouble I'm going to get into, and how am I going to explain what the hell I'm doing in this situation. The guy I was with, the special forces guy, he had a lot of combat experience, and he was actually physically smaller than me, but it was like the Incredible Hulk or something. He just became extremely menacing, and it's the talk though. It was not, you could see it in his eye, right? But he scared the bejeebas out of these guys, these who were giving us trouble, because first of all, he clearly wanted a fight. He was dying for it, right? Like
Yeah.
he's he's put together like that. He's an adrenaline junkie, and he's and he knows what he's doing, and he really just wanted to rip their lungs out and eat them in front of him, And but I was incredibly impressed. I would love. I don't have it. I know I don't have it, but I would love to be able to just flick the switch and turn on the menace.
Yeah.
And watch people run away, or have to. But that would. I was never going to do that. I was sitting there thinking about my job, and he was sitting there thinking about eating their lungs.
He was hungry for a fight, and this is why my friend, the philosopher Bouncer, and you remember this distinctly because he also has a sense of humor. So when two guys, like big guys, started shoving each other, he took a chair from a nearby kiosk and sat on it, saying, "This is all BS. You're not going to fight.
Okay, all right, we're getting very far away from Middle Eastern politics, but I have to tell you
no, Mike. No, this is Middle Eastern politics. I want to remind you of what you wrote about the killing of Soleimani. You said this is exactly the logic. The logic is this is a neighborhood of bullies, and you have to send out the message that you're a bully.
Yeah, you have to. But there's a famous. Do you know Howard Cosell?
No.
Howard Cosell was a newscaster. I mean, a sportscaster, a sports commentator, journalist in the 1960s, 60s, and 70s. He a Jewish guy, and he had a very. I think he was Jewish. Must have been. Maybe I'm wrong. But he had his name's Howard. He has to be. Almost all Howards are Jewish, aren't they? But he had a very distinctive way of talking. I can't do imitations, but it was something like this. This is Howard Cosell. Very, very distinctive. Anyway, there were two guys on the street. Two drunks were having a fight, and he had his limousine stop, and he got out, and he started calling the fight, but making fun of them. And they stopped. They were so embarrassed to have Howard Cosell commentating on their fighting that they stopped.
So how do you rate Bibi in that respect, Netanyahu? Do you think he's made of the stern stuff?
I think he's made of stern stuff, and I think he's one of the finest politicians in the world today. More talented than most. I do think he is much more cautious than his critics say he is. I think most Israelis know this, that he's always looking for the deal, and he's always trimming constantly. So you don't know right now. I mean, right now in Rafah, is he actually going into Rafah? We've been told since December that he keeps telling us, including this weekend, what, as you mentioned, that the left attacked him for. So he said this will not end until we go into Rafah. But I think there's going to be a deal here. I know you don't think so. There's going to be a deal.
I'm not sure because I think Netanyahu gives too much credit to the very loud, very small group of the Never-Bibi crowd, who are also, we have to admit, allied with the American administration and also the army. So we enumerated the pressures on Netanyahu in our last episode, but he also has a fifth column inside his cabinet where he is in the minority even about Rafah. Even Gallant voted against going to Rafah at some point in the last week. Mike, we're seriously out of time. And we do want to say something about the dumbest take. Shall we do only one, or do we?
Yeah, just do yours. I want to say two quick things about analysis, if I may.
So please do before the dumbest take.
Okay. Number one is that this withholding of arms shipments, in my opinion, is about. It's about Lebanon as much as it is about Gaza. They want to make sure that when the ceasefire on Gaza comes, that it ends with a ceasefire on Lebanon as well. Because this is they want to end the Houthis attacks against the shipping, and they want to end the conflict in Lebanon all at the same time. So they're afraid They're afraid that we'll get ceasefire in Gaza and then escalation in Lebanon. So this is part of a larger understanding of regional balance. And this is the last thing I want to say. Ask yourself this. The Americans are not stupid, right? They're not stupid. They have a plan. The plan, we may disagree with the plan and we may think the plan is stupid, but they have thought through all of the different, all of the connections. On the one hand, they're saying they want the Palestinian Authority to take over in Gaza. On the other hand, by stopping the conflict with Rafah, which is what they're clearly trying to do, they're keeping Hamas alive. So, I mean, what you might say, look, if you're an Israeli to the Americans, you want to bring the Palestinian Authority in. You can't get the Palestinian Authority in unless you get rid of Hamas. So we're doing the work for you to bring in the Palestinian Authority. Now, of course, the Israelis don't want to bring in the Palestinian Authority, but American policy looks like it's working against itself in that it is keeping Hamas alive and bringing in the Palestinian Authority at the same time. So what is their concept? They have a concept, and this is what I want you to see. Number one, they want Fatah, Hamas reconciliation. I don't know if you saw the news report. We never talked about it here, that the Chinese, the Turks are getting involved in trying to bring the Hamas and the Fatah together to get some kind of power sharing agreement. The Chinese are involved in this. It's because they can all read and they can see where this is going. There's going to be a Hamas element in Gaza and a Fatah element in Gaza, and they want to bring it together so that there can be some kind of peace and security there. Now, the Americans also are tacitly, if Hamas is still there in a weakened state, but still there, that means what? It means Iran is still there, and Iran can play spoiler. So the Americans are not just negotiating over the heads of the Israelis with Hamas, they're negotiating over the heads of the Israelis with Iran. And they're saying, let's work to stabilize this together, just like we worked to stabilize Yemen together, just like we worked to stabilize we want to work to stabilize Lebanon together. This is a regional order in which the United States and Iran talk to each other over the heads of Israel. It's very bad for Israel. Very bad.
Yeah, so perhaps if I may add a comment and take more time, perhaps the solution for Israel cannot be with careful planning, but it has to do something to break this cycle. And perhaps the key lies in Lebanon. I'll try to lay this out more, to flush it out more in more detail next time, but I think the key is putting the Biden administration in a place where it can't defend its own policy is somehow the key.
They're a step ahead of you. That's why they're withholding the arms shipments. The argument about Lebanon is going on right now over Rafah.
I disagree with you, because if Israel is wildly attacked by Hezbollah and the Americans are going to keep the shipments out, this is not a policy that I think they can sustain, given the structure of the American administration and the fact that the Biden administration is cheating its own voters about its own Middle East policy. Save your response for next time. Next week we are still in two places, but the week after that we are going to be at the, dare I say,
headquarters, at the headquarters,
exactly, in Washington D.C., because I'm coming to a conference of rabbis in D.C. because many Jews are many Jews are very, very worried.
How many rabbis have you talked to in your life?
Oh, many.
Really?
Many, of course. But these are.
When's the last time how do you what do you do with tefillin? You wrap tefillin? What do you do?
The what?
What's the English word you use for the verb to put tefillin on?
Tefillin. I don't know.
Tefillin. Sorry, tefillin.
Yeah, I don't. If that's a question.
When's the last time you put?
I think my on, but I'm not sure. But that doesn't. There are many alliances with many, especially.
No, it just amuses me to think about you hanging out with rabbis. That's all. I understand that politically you can be aligned with them. I'm aligned with lots of rabbis, but
I just said many Jews are extremely worried and baffled, and I think partly it is our joint job to try and make sense of what is happening, both in the Middle East and in American campuses, because everything is connected. So very, very quickly, my dumbest take on the news, and it's kind of unfair because this is really done. So this is a tweet by Ariv Oppenheimer, who used to be the chair of Shalom Achshav. And what he says against the incursion into Rafah is, he said, for the first time, there is a breakthrough with the negotiations in Hamas. And now, of all times, you are entering Rafah and going to spoil this. And Yotam Zimri, who is on the Patriotim, it's a half satirical show on Channel 14, said, isn't it strange that now that we are entering Rafah, there is suddenly a breakthrough? But the way the left think about these things is that their frame of mind is that Israel is always guilty and the Palestinians always harbor good intentions. It doesn't matter how many October 7th or terrorist attacks we'll have. That's the frame of mind. Last comments by Dr. Duran. Yes.
No, I have no comments. It was a pleasure talking to you today, and I'll see you next week.
Yes, you will. Thank you very much for listening or watching us, and we are here every week to update you about whatever there is to update you in Israel.
Philosopher bouncers.